This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. Brought to you by the Fort Hall School of Government, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 11th of August 2020 and I am 2J.
I'm JM.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Star, why UHURU will support Raila in 2022. In the Standard, Kenya's richest counties listed. And in the Daily Nation, for Ruto allies, it's no game of chicken. Let us begin with the Daily Nation.
Yes.
Now, what is game of chicken, guys?
I don't think the Daily Nation actually knows what the reference is.
I beg to differ. I think they do.
All
So
right.
let's go. So a game of chicken is a game in which two drivers are driving towards each other. And the idea is that one is supposed to swerve before the other. And the one who does swerve before the other in order to avoid collision is the chicken. Now here, what I think the Daily Nation is trying to articulate is that Ruto allies have decided not even to participate in this game. And here's why. So it chronicles how DP's allies have gone silent, and that's been their tactic.
Yeah.
And you have the likes of Ndindi Nyoro and Rigathi Gachagua, both saying that, listen, why should we as DP's generals be heard speaking all over the political field when silence is working smart for us? That was Ndindi Nyoro. And then you have Gachagua saying, Tanga need not talk when our opponents' utterances are an asset to us. Listen to Jubilee Vice Chairman David Murathe speak and you'll realize why we need not waste our energy on a bad cause. So for them, silence is the political strategy. And then they've also said how a lot of DP's allies have sort of ditched him for fear of coming at, at crosshairs with the head of state. So you have lots of parastatal chiefs and civil servants choosing to observe silence for survival. Because they say if you come up with something that contradicts the president, apparently EACC will be sent to you.
Yes.
And they will scrutinize how you're spending your CDF. And it's the sort of Putin thing, the legal squeeze, where if people aren't acting in line, you show them the law.
Absolutely.
GK, you have just described to me a game of chicken.
No.
You've described to me a game of chicken, and I want to propose a new headline for the Daily Nation. It is not for Ruto's allies, it is no game of chicken, but rather, for Ruto's allies, it's a game of chicken. I think the point of the game of chicken is that you need to look more abrasive and more aggressive than your opponent.
Okay.
And I think what has successfully happened is that the president and his allies have managed to
look more abrasive
and more aggressive, to the point where Ruto's allies have had to back down.
But
so for me, I saw the president, he went for it, and they swerved.
They didn't
successfully.
They refused to even participate in getting in their car.
That is cowardice. That is a one game of chicken in the hands of the president.
They're not getting into the car. They're not even driving towards the president.
They have been beaten into submission. And their silence does confirm that they have been paper tigers.
Exactly.
All along. Yeah.
Wow, guys. Okay, so we have a three-part headline, three-part criteria that we're going to use to break down the headlines. We'll ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
Yes.
I thought the Daily Nation was extremely thoughtful.
I like my new headline.
Okay, we can give you the new headline and this one, so we can park that for now. Let us move to the Star.
Yes. Why UHURU will support Raila in 2022? This is according to David Murathe. So David Murathe says that President Kenyatta will back ODM leader Raila Odinga to succeed him in 2022 because he is the only one capable, and I'm quoting here, of holding the country together, end quote. The playing field now shows that he is the only one with sufficient experience and statesmanship to take over from President Uhuru Kenyatta. He also adds that Kenyatta's owed the Odingas a debt because Raila's father helped Mzee Kenyatta to ascend to the presidency despite sustained pressure from the colonialists or colonizers back in 63. Lastly, he's saying that the 2022 ticket, at least on the one hand, will be a Raila and a Peter Kenneth duo.
Firstly, this argument is so flawed on so many levels. Because the debt argument will come and work against Uhuru Kenyatta later on. Because by this same argument, then we also owe, or Uhuru also owes William Ruto a debt.
Yeah.
Right? So, and which debt should you repay first?
Yeah.
I mean,
The debt of 1963
or this
or
one,
the debt of 2013.
2013. And for Murathe, it looks like money has been poured. I mean, how all of a sudden are you singing these praises?
Yeah, JM, let me ask you this. Who do you think Murathe is speaking for? For the party or for Murathe?
Sometimes,
I think for Murathe.
sometimes it just so happens that people speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And they try and impose their agenda on other people.
Interesting.
You know, it is what it is. So there's a big chance that
He's
he
not
could be speaking for himself and not
Very
necessarily
true.
for
Because I think this is speculative. Can we toss it or should we keep it?
I agree. Let's toss it.
Toss it?
we toss it.
So there we go. We're tossing a star onto the Standard.
In a change of gears, the Standard gives us Kenya's richest counties listed. So they tell us rat race. Nairobi, Meru, Nyeri, Kirinyaga lead the pack in jobs, housing and education and health, while Turkana, Mandera, Samburu and Busia are the poorest. So this comes from a latest KNBS report that confirms, I think we all know this, that Nairobi, the commercial hub of the country, is by far the richest country. But then we have other counties with more poor people. They also link this new report to the ongoing CRA debate. And so they say that this report took on a multi-dimensional view of what poverty is. So it looked at things like physical development, nutrition, health, education, child protection, information, water, sanitation, housing. And these are kind of the things that we see encapsulate the CRA formula. They tell us that young women between the ages of 18 to 34 are most likely to be multi-dimensionally poor. So not just poor in one kind of linear, you know, looking view. And so that they say that this may be used in the CRA argument. I think that's
to justify what?
To justify that the current proposal is unfair to some counties. That if we're seeing that all of these counties are poor, maybe we need to take a different approach to how we look at CRA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
but
hopefully Senate actually pays attention to some of these details. Because it feels like Senate has been hijacked by the politics of the day.
Absolutely. And the other part of the debate that we must have is that one of accountability for the tyranny of minority communities. The pastoralist communities, which in total probably get to about 6%, 7% of the entire population of this country.
Receiving.
And oftentimes they won't cooperate for audits to be done by the national government on how they've spent their money since 2013 or since 2010. And they can't account for much of it. And we know that most of that, some of that money just ends up coming back into Nairobi. We Nairobians don't complain per se. Although, you know, the price of houses will go up once they come and inflate it with cash. But we need to have a more fact-based conversation.
And they need to, that's what needs to happen. I think if we're buying into this idea of devolution, we need to buy into it wholeheartedly. And at the end of the day, the point was to have functional economies at the county level. So you can't constantly be relying on the economy of Narok, of Nairobi, of Mombasa. You need to have sustainable, you know, revenue collection systems.
And two things. So evidence of service delivery and fiscal responsibility. And I'm a firm believer of money should follow function. So you shouldn't just be asking for this money, but like what JM said, are you able to develop? Are you able to? Are you just bringing it back to Nairobi? So those things need to be considered.
Most definitely.
Who are we giving our winning headline?
Well, I think
you know where I am.
Give it to the Daily Nation.
Thank you. Daily Nation gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria that we will use. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? Can we begin with the Standard, please?
Yes. And in the Standard, we have Gado, who seems like he had nothing to draw today. And so he gave us some animals running, maybe, what do they call it? The badminton race.
No, it's
the baton relay. Yes. And so at the back we have the mad cow disease. Then after that we have the bird flu, followed by the swine flu, who is handing the baton over to the coronavirus.
Completely uninspiring.
It doesn't make you think at all. What is the point?
Toss it, Haraka Sana.
I had no ideas.
There we go.
Let's move to the Daily Nation. So in the Daily Nation, we have a caricature of Raila Odinga on his horse-drawn carriage. He has 2 horses, and they're facing each other. One is is called referendum, and the other is called elections. And he is saying, I insist a referendum must come before the general election. And this is coming off of his interview that he did. And, you know, he has, ODM, the leader of ODM, has ruled out holding a referendum together with the 2022 election, which I suspect might be the cheaper option. But he insists that the vote to change the constitution must be done separately before the polls.
I think it's a great cartoon. The election clearly has a defined direction, and the referendum is confused. It doesn't know which way to go.
Which is actually the true state of affairs, I think, right now, with BBI and the referendum.
Corona stopped BBI for now. We will see. In the Star. In
the Star, we have a cartoon here of a caricature of the CS for Health, Mutai Kagwe, trying to scrub off the M in Mafia House. It's a sign, I suppose, at Mafia House, saying it behaves abnormally. And the context here is the recent debate we've had about the COVID-19 funds and the use of those funds and the misuse as well. I think what's come out clearly is that there's some wars going on internally about who's controlling the funds and how all of that is being used. Kagwe seems to be trying to clean that up.
And I mean, I don't mean to defend government, but the pandemic also called for them to sort of do things quickly, and maybe procurement wasn't going to happen the very way we know it, which is long and, you know, arduous and whatnot. But we hope that there'll be sort of some declaration of how these funds were spent. And hopefully it will be...
But I also think government shouldn't waste its time trying to pander to the logic of its citizens. I think sometimes you just have to get stuff done. Okay, so who are we giving our winning cartoon? Between the Star and the Daily Nation?
I think we'll give it to the Daily Nation.
I would agree. There you have it. The impasse that is referendum and election and vice versa. And now for our final thought. But before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought today is inspired by a book entitled Waste: Uncovering the Global Food Scandal by Tristram Stewart. And fun fact about the author, he survives off scavenging food exclusively from supermarket bins. And maybe you'll understand why as we explain the book. So global agricultural systems are struggling to feed all 7 billion of us on planet Earth. But the biggest problem isn't yield or climate change, and it may not even be things like biofuels or rising meat consumption. As the author argues, the biggest problem is actually waste. And so the book traces this problem around the globe from the top to the bottom of the food production chain. And so in researching this book, Stewart took trains and buses from London into Europe, through Russia and Central Asia, through Pakistan and India, across to China, and by ferry into South Korea and Japan. So he really traveled the earth to answer this question. And his argument is that in the West, they throw away 1/3 of the food that they buy. And that is in just households alone, in homes. More is thrown away in supermarkets, from suppliers, from manufacturers, and even food that is never harvested from farms at all. And if you add up all of this waste, you get a very startling fact, that the waste from the US and the EU combined would be enough to satisfy the needs of the world's hungry 3 to 7 times over.
Wow.
And so he says that between nations, you have this very striking difference in attitudes to food, and particularly to waste. And he says from factories and farms across the world, perfectly edible food in millions of tons is disregarded. And he says often that's because it was rejected, because a quota was met, demand was low, or because it didn't look good. That's a very strange thing they have out in the West. If a fruit or vegetable doesn't look good, they don't sell it. And so in the book, he shows these very shocking pictures of like excess tomatoes in Tenerife, excess oranges in California. Exactly. And imperfect bananas in Costa Rica. I don't know what an imperfect banana looks like. And so importantly, this book shows that ultimately, this waste is not just a case of the West's decadence, but in the developing world, arguably, we also have these issues of unnecessary food waste. In some less developed countries, because of a lack of basic infrastructure, things like silos, roads, and refrigeration, and in certain cases, corruption as well, we've resulted in these mountains of grain and fruit being left to rot while the population is suffering from malnutrition. And so he says that as much as this food spoilage is a global problem, sometimes we find is more prevalent in Africa because of poor physical infrastructure and technological mishaps. So this lack of proper facilities post-harvest means that sometimes 40% of our food is wasted before we can even eat it. And so just to ground it, I looked into what the situation is in Kenya. And so some of the data from KNBS from 2018 showed that farmers lost earnings as they struggled to manage, store, and even transport their produce to market. So growers lost 1.9 million tons of food as millions of Kenyans were grappling with food shortages because of the drought. So he says, or rather the facts show that maize, which is our staple food, was the hardest hit. Farmers lost 29 billion shillings to post-harvest waste, and that came from rodents or poor handling. And this big buzzword that we hear all the time, aflatoxin, was one of those key issues, which is a toxin produced by fungi due to exposure because of humidity and moisture. And so ultimately, I think one interesting argument he makes is that as much as, yes, in Africa, we're dealing with our own issues, consumption in rich countries inflates global food prices. So their demand is so high and that they increase overall supply that it pushes up the prices of food. And so it makes grains less affordable for people like us in Africa. So I guess at the end of the day, the question is, how can we be better? And I think everybody can take steps in their own way. We need to be self-sufficient, perhaps in growing and feeding ourselves, not depending too much on the West. I'll talk about a rich country problem, and this is waste from supermarkets. And so he asks, why do supermarkets, or why do producers of food products overproduce? And there's a few reasons. Supermarkets ensure that their customers' favorite products are always available for fear of losing dissatisfied clientele. So it's very consumer oriented, that they don't want to disappoint the consumer. And I'll give us a short story about that. The other is that it's a perception thing. So supermarkets deliberately will overstock because they believe that shoppers like to see full shelves. And I think I also subscribe to that philosophy, that perception, because if I see an empty shelf, then I think, panic. I just think that you're not taking your job seriously as a supermarket, and that kind of thing. But the logic as well is also that losses that may be incurred by waste will be recouped by attracting more and more customers to their stores. This is why they overstock and are happy to throw away a lot of food at the end of the day. And then lastly, and this is really about poor management, is that people who make food orders predict the sales badly day after day. That's also just another reason. So you've just got poor managers in terms of forecasting what is needed versus what is produced, and that kind of thing just carries on for a while longer. Let me just give two stories of my own personal experiences. One is at the Chandrana at Yaya Center, and you've got a very good, very zealous customer. These guys who stock up the shelves. He's a supervisor, but he always makes sure that he always walks around doing inspections, ensuring that the shelves are full. People stock up the shelves. And I was shopping one time, and the manager actually ended up calling the producers of a particular supplier, saying, look, it's 10 a.m. I need sausages on the shelves. Customers are coming in anytime now. Those are good supermarkets, and those are supermarkets which we often like to shop at. And now the converse is that supermarkets don't like to have stockouts, and oftentimes you'll go to some supermarkets, I wouldn't name which one, but one that has recently very expanded in a big way. But anytime I go there, I always overhear very disappointed and even angry customers. Where is my Skippy peanut butter? Where's the peanut butter? How can you not have peanut butter for like 2 weeks in a row? Why do I come here? And the guy is visibly frustrated. He has a baby on his on the trolley, and the trolley is like almost full, and the only thing he's missing is Skippy. Now he's thinking, but isn't that the problem?
I have to go to another supermarket to get Skippy peanut butter, and I've already filled up this entire cart.
But isn't that the problem of like the middle class need for instant gratification?
It is, and this is why we miss Nakumat so much, because you never had stockouts.
I didn't see that.
And number two, they always anticipated the needs of the consumer, and they did a very good job, a very fine fine job at doing all of that and giving us what we needed.
And maybe that customer could have just gone to the veggie section where they actually make you natural peanut butter. They have a
But it's not Skippy.
It's not Skippy, but it'll help the local economy.
Exactly.
So in one of the last chapters of the book, he talks about islands of hope, and he gives the story of Japan. And very quickly he begins actually with a quote from Wangari Maathai, our very own Nobel laureate, and it says, in Japanese, there's a Buddhist concept known as motainai, which encourages us to be grateful for the resources we have, to be respectful of them, and use them with care. It also calls for us not to waste. And I thought it was so apt. So Japan was a story where traditionally, Japanese children were taught about moitanai. They were taught to be frugal, to always finish the food on your plate, because if you didn't, it showed ingratitude to the farmers. And if you didn't finish, the moitanai monsters would come and get you at night. But after the war, you see Japan shifting. So Japan hosts the Olympics in, I think, 1964, and then it goes through this boom in the 80s where it becomes extremely affluent. It's one of the world cities, And with this affluence came a change in eating habits. So the Japanese are known for their love of raw seafood, the sushi, the tataki, all sorts of decadent little bitings, right? But logistically, this means that your food supply chain is from ocean to restaurant or supermarket. The shelf life is really short. Now, the Japanese are known for being, so strict about the expiration deadline. So much so that 2 days later, no fish is on the shelf. Supermarkets throw it out. So this love for this seafood and the love for this raw delicacies is what is also fueling the wastage in the country. So these are some facts. In 2005, it said that Japan wasted food with a value worth $100 billion.
Wow.
Right? It created 19 billion tons of food-related waste.
19 billion tons.
Yep. And had it been saved, it would have been worth enough to feed more than 160 million people. That means for every 3 Japanese people, 4 more people could have been fed off the value of their waste.
Oh, wow.
But they've come to do much better. They've instituted a lot of food wastage laws. For instance, they're trying to, they recycle their food waste into animal feed. So they're saying, don't just throw your waste into a biogas digester or compost heap. First, use the surplus food to raise the livestock, then use the animal manure to make biogas, and then finally use the digestate for the compost. And then otherwise, you would be wasting, the waste's great potential. So you're creating sort of this cycle, and I think that's what Japan now is encouraging. They still love sushi, so there's still a problem. There's still a lot of wastage because they want a lot of fresh sushi. And they have a term that reminded me of 2J. It's called kuya dore, and this is eating until your finances collapse. They have so many Michelin-starred restaurants. In fact, they have more Michelin-starred restaurants in Tokyo than France. And so people love to spend money on good food.
I like good food.
2J, till they collapse, till your finances collapse. Anyway, on a day where we had a winning headline from the Daily Nation and a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation as well, I want to leave you with this. Seeing as we're talking about food, Maya Angelou once said, on a positive note, eating is so intimate. It's very sensual. When you invite someone to sit at your table and you want to cook for them, you're inviting that person into your life. So just make sure you finish your food. It should be disrespectful. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Prime Free to Air.